So, hi everyone, this is Becca B, and I have with me Avi is in the house again. Hi. Usually on Becca's Book Talks, I will send the questionnaire out to the interviewee to review it first, and then we will go over the book questionnaire as well as their latest books. But this time, this is a little different. So what I have here are questions from a fan base in Canada from a Jay Lang. So Jay Lang, if you're watching, thank you for compiling all these questions for me and sending them to my email. So Avi, let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
Okay, cool. All right. So the first question that came from your fans is, you have been visiting schools for book visits since the 1970s. How would you say young people and schools have changed over the years?
Well, what's amazing to me is they ask the same questions. Over the years, it's unusual for me to be asked something new. It happens, but by and large, the questions remain remarkably the same. Where do you get your ideas? When did you start writing? How long does it take to write a book? And then, depending if they've read a specific book, they might ask, where did you get the idea for this? And then they occasionally, not often, drill down as, well, why did such and such a thing happen in your book? And if I've written the book 30 years ago, I'm desperate to figure out an answer for that. And I'm not always able to do that. But by and large, the questions have not changed over the years, which I find sort of interesting in itself. So no, fairly regular questions.
Okay. Have you ever walked out of a school visit? And if so, what were the circumstances?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I did. This was a school, a suburban, I think it was a Massachusetts school, and it was a very wealthy school district. And what happened is that the parents set up the visit, which is never a good situation. You always want the school itself and the faculty to motivate the visit and bring it forward. But in this case, it was parents who, I guess, asked for and paid for, and the school, I think, probably reluctantly handed the assignment to the newest teacher on the staff. All of these are not good signs. And
Okay.
then when I was talking to the kids, they began to ask over and over again, well, how much money did you make for this book or that book? And the first time, it seemed, okay, that's a legitimate question. But when it was the 13th time, I said, if that question is asked one more time, I'm getting out and walking away. And sure enough, some smart, I won't say the word, smart jackass asked the question. I said, that's it, goodbye. And I packed up, and to the stunned silence of the class, I walked out. I walked into the office. I said, can I speak to the principal? And I said, this is really not the way to conduct things, and I'm leaving. And she was embarrassed, and, well, we didn't, etc. Anyway, so there you are. I did do that once.
Interesting. So then, as a writer of historical fiction and someone who studies history, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Well, you said many of these questions are coming from Canada. Maybe I should move there.
A lot of I was ready to. I was ready, and I was seriously considering it after what happened this last election.
Right.
But
Right,
but with the
exactly.
question.
So in the long run, as a reader of history, things change. Life does move on. It doesn't always go for the better, and it can go through long periods of time where it's pretty bad. But in our own history, the USA, we have our ups and downs and this and that. But by and large, we seem to muddle through. So I would prefer to be optimistic, but it takes effort. How's that?
Yeah. How has being a stepfather and raising stepchildren impacted your writing?
I think being a step parent is harder than being a biological parent.
Hmm.
That's my experience. The biological parent, things are, as it were, built in. When you are a step parent, it makes me much more conscious of what I'm doing and what the potential problems are. I think, for example, you don't take things for granted. You have to be as absolutely honest as you can, because kids are brilliant at seeing through hypocrisy and contradiction.
Yes.
So you have to be very straight. You don't have to always be right. You're not. You can't be. But you have to be straight, and you have to be much more conscious of what you're doing and work at it in that way. And I think perhaps the best response to that is I wrote a collection of short stories called The Most Important Thing. And, and it's all about parent, and it's actually father-son relationships. And it tries to articulate all the variations of father-son relationships. Obviously, not all of them, but some of them that I've experienced. And it tries to answer the questions, what's the most important thing you can do for your son as a parent? And that certainly was in part based on things I've learned as a parent, both as a biological and as a step parent. So, and the most important thing you can do, I think, particularly with teenagers, there are two things. You have to love your child, and you have to convince them that you do. And it's the second one that's the hardest.
Interesting.
And you say, oh, well, I love you, my child, and so forth. But your child doesn't always accept that or believe that for whatever reason, because I don't let them have a cell phone, or they have to be in by 10 o'clock at night, whatever it is. So that's the hard thing. And so you have to establish the relationship. Has that informed my writing? I hope so. I really do. The particular short story that I'm referencing in that collection, what's the most important thing? It's a little short story about a kid whose his widowed mother is about to remarry. And the kid says to his mother, well, I have to interview my prospective stepfather and see if he's any good. And because he's seen his mother apply for a job. And the implication is that this new male is going to apply to him for the job as stepfather. So he puts together a series of questions to interview this guy. And it's a funny story, but it's fun to read. It's called Tidy Whities or Boxers. At one point, that's one of the questions he asked this guy. What do you wear, tidy whities or boxers? So,
Wow. I think in a few of the books that I've read of yours, there is like a not so much a step parent, but like an adult figure in the child's life that this child needs to look up to.
yeah, I mean, in even a book like Crispin, my Newbery book, the character of Bear is
Yes.
sort of a stepfather to
Hmm.
Crispin. He is,
Yeah.
and that appears I've just written a new book that'll come out in next January. It's called The Road from Nowhere.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of stepfather emerges in that book as well. So yeah,
Okay,
I like
cool.
stepfathers.
Uh, okay. Yeah, I literally just started the novel, so I might want to. I do have a couple of questions about it, but I haven't
Sure,
really like finished. I didn't get a chance to finish the whole thing.
sure.
But definitely, I have some questions about the location because I believe I
Mm.
think I've been there. What book of yours do you think is your most underrated?
Underrated.
Hmm.
Um, some people think The Barn. The Barn, it tells a story set in the state of Oregon in the mid 19th century, and tells the story of three kids who live with their father, and the father becomes extremely ill, and the kids they're pioneers, and they have to decide. They try to take care of him, and they decide that what the father wants most in life was a new barn. So the kids decide this will cure him, so to speak. They will build a new barn. The oldest siblings, boy and girl, work on the barn, and the younger one, while he works on the barn, he takes care of his father.
Mm.
And his father is very ill. And the book is brutally honest about what it takes to take care of an ill person. Everything from feeding him, changing his clothes,
Mhm.
cleaning him, etc.
Yeah.
And I think it's a touching story. It meant a lot to write it, and I like the book enormously. The Barn.
Why would you think it's the most underrated? I think just because of the subject matter or like,
Well, it's hard. It's difficult. Uh, some people are put off by it because it's graphic in the sense that uh,
mhm,
at one point the narrator, it's in a first person, he says, "I have to tell you what it's like to take care of my father and clean his body because he's stuck in bed." And I think people find that kind of realism
mhm,
a little difficult. It's not uh, ugly. It's all or tries to be very loving, but it's hard for people. And you know, death is a subject. If you're talking about the death of a parent, it's very painful. It is. It is for all of us. And some people can deal with it and some can't. But I think it's a powerful book.
I definitely agree with that. What interesting stories do you have about your time working as a librarian? And do you ever miss working as one?
I liked working as a librarian. It's basically I'm a bibliomaniac. I live with books. I've always lived with books. I was an early reader. I still read every day in one form or another for my own pleasure, for research. Um, and working in a library with colleagues who are librarians and who have a love of books, helping people find books, being surrounded by books. I loved it. And I enjoyed it. I mean, it was fun in the sense that it was work and sometimes difficult, but it always had meaning for me. So, and you know, in my own life, I have tons of books. When I moved from the city to where I live now in a more rural place, there
Mhm.
was something like 5,000 books in my house. And I had to give them away. I wasn't, but I couldn't sell them. I didn't want to sell them. I gave them to used book dealers,
Mhm.
knowing they would sell them, but that they would find a new home, as it were. And even here in a much smaller house, the question often put to me by my wife is, when are you going to get rid of all those extra books that are piled up on the floor? And the answer is, oh, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. And I mean, just this morning I looked at, oh, I could get rid of that one, but I don't quite. So I'm surrounded by books in every sense of the word.
Yeah. You're like me. I have like a right now my library is sort of dispersed because it's in this room, it's in another part of the house. That's like,
Right,
and then there's some
right,
in my
right,
public storage because I had to
right,
move. I moved
right,
from my two-story home in Victorville back to my folks after two major health issues. So all
right.
my books are like, I think I think over the years, I think I've gotten rid of like maybe three or four at most.
Well, there's only one time I hate books. It's when I have to move. Then they are incredibly heavy and bulky.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but that doesn't happen that often. So
Now, I'm not sure if this question is part of the fan questions, but what was the library that you used to work at?
I used to work, I had two experiences as a librarian. I worked for the New York Public Library in New York
Okay.
City, and I worked in what is known as special collections. I worked at their Lincoln Center branch, the Library of Performing Arts, in the theater collection.
Uh-huh.
I came to that because my early career as a writer was a playwright. So I had certain knowledge about theater. So I worked there at the theater collection for about 10 years. And then I moved from there to work in a college library, a college now known as um, the State College of New Jersey, I think it's called. When I was there, it was called Trenton State College. And I
Trenton
was
State. Oh yeah,
a
Trenton. Okay. Yeah.
yeah. And so I was a librarian there for another 10 years or so. So all in all, I was a librarian for about 20 years.
Wow.
And there again, surrounded by books, and took a lot of pleasure in it. And it was a good experience. I liked it. And it
Yeah.
was fun.
I did some volunteer work through my junior college as like a volunteer part of the Santa Clarita library here in SoCal. And I thought I would get into like library science, but I found out that I didn't like dealing with the algorithms. I would rather just help people to like figure out where the books were and where they could locate this and that. But I think because of all the technology and because I'm not sure if the Dewey last I checked with the Dewey Decimal System, if they're still even using that. It's been there's like so many different like systems the where all of the info for books is like systematically coded, and it's like what I didn't like. I did take three precursor library science courses, and it was just too for me it was just too algorithmic. I was more into like the research of
Right.
what the books were. That what I found was the most interesting for my part. On number 7, it says, let's see, you say in one of your blog post quotes, in my capacity as an author, making many school visits, spend a lot of time in a school that way, and you pass a fair number of hours in the teacher's lounge. Amazing what you hear there, especially since not everyone knew who I was. End of
Correct.
quote. I am curious, what interesting stories did you hear in the teacher's lounge?
Well, out of that experience came a book, an important book of mine is called Nothing But the Truth. And that book tells the story of a crisis in a school, and it has to do with things that were said or not said and misinterpreted. And when you sit in this teacher's lounge um, days, teachers would walk in and vent their frustrations over this, that, or the other thing. Everything that from I spoke to my principal and he said, or she said to, oh, I have this student today who's just driving me crazy, to, I had a visit from a parent today. I couldn't believe what that parent said. You know, that teacher's room is sort of sacrosanct, and teachers are there amongst themselves and they're talking out their days, frustrations, difficulties, and pleasures. It could be, oh, I had the student today, they wrote this wonderful poem, and I really have to tell you about it. So you hear all this stuff. And if I'm sitting there and it's a big school, they don't necessarily know who I am yet. And just listen. Listening is the best way to know about the world.
The following questions have to do with the Dimwood Forest series,
Mhm.
and a lot of questions stemmed from the character of Aerith. This is a series I have not read yet, but a lot of questions stemmed, I guess, because Aerith is a very likable character for the readership in this. The J. Lang worked at this place called the Grace Library, and I forgot what place in Canada it was from. I forgot where that was. But the next question is: you have said that the character of Aerith from your Dimwood Forest series might be a self-portrait of yourself. What did you mean by that?
Well, there are people who refer to me as grumpy, and I don't, I can be, I guess, like anyone else. Um, he- he's, I think I'm a warrior in the Eeyore tradition, and that's certainly an aspect of the character Aerith,
Mhm.
but it wasn't consciously a portrait of anyone, much less myself, but it was a portrayal of a character uh, exactly opposite the main character, Poppy. And except Aerith, for all his grumpiness, has a very big heart, and he's always trying to help Poppy, and he never does anything negative.
Mm.
What he does in the books, which endears him to kids, he swears a lot, but he swears with nonsense language.
Interesting.
And and it's funny. It's very funny. Uh, and the kids love it because it's inventive, it's nonsense, but it seems to express something that it doesn't really express at the same time. Uh, Mainly it's funny. And he's swearing, and he does it with this very elaborate language that was wonderfully fun to write, and the kids really enjoy it.
I guess because the kids they're not used to, or like they don't get a chance to swear off. Maybe they just like
No,
mental
no,
communication.
no. And but the point is that this swearing is nonsense.
Yeah.
It's just odd words strung together. And that's I can't even remember them, but yeah, one of them was he says something like, "Oh, belching beavers," or something, or it's just sort of silly stuff. And kids love silly, so I like silly too. So
Yeah.
there you go.
For the next question based on Aerith, you also mentioned that your book Aerith's Birthday is one of your favorites. Why would that be?
Oh, that's another stepfather. If
I thought about it. Yeah.
okay, so the story is that it's Aerith's birthday, and he's decided that nobody is paying attention to him. So he says, "I'm getting out of here." And what he does is he goes off into the forest and he finds a fox, a vixen, who's been caught in a trap and is dying. And the last wish of this fox says to Aerith, "Would you please take care of my kids, my children?" And dies, and he goes off and he takes care of these rambunctious young foxes who think he's hilarious and tease him all the time. And it's how they learn to work together and get together. And it was fun to write. And that really was based on my own experience with, at the time, my new stepkids. So I could tell you which character is which, but yeah, it's a funny book.
Cool. And because this book differs from the others in the series, that the main character this time is Aerith, how is that different for you to write a book focused on Aerith as a main character? Because in the other books, he's a supporting character. How did you know Aerith had enough vitality as a character to carry an entire book on his own?
The thing about those Poppy books, I loved writing them.
Mm-hmm.
I really knew all those characters. I enjoyed them, and I loved writing about them. And I don't want to suggest that it was easy to write them, but in the sense that I was never at a loss as to how to tell the stories or find story to write about, because I enjoyed it. I was there as an observer of my own stories, and I love writing about them.
Yeah.
And even, they weren't written in sequence. What is now the third book in the series was the first book. And the second book turned out to be the last one that I wrote. But you can read them all the way through, and they're very consistent in style, mainly because I knew what I was doing and really, again, enjoyed so much being in their presence, so to speak.
This is based on another blog post. It says, when I publish my books, I give copies to all my kids. That said, the book I never did distribute was Eric's birthday. After all, it's my vision, the stepfather, of being a parent. I was never quite sure how my kids would receive it. So Jay asks, I was just curious, did any of your children and stepchildren ever get around to reading Eric's birthday? And if so,
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Mm.
I mean, I send my kids, all of them, the books that I publish, but I don't ask them if they've read them. And occasionally they'll say, oh, I read this and I really liked it. But I don't know anybody who's read all my books. Not even my wife has read all my books. And I say, have you ever read this one? No, I never did. Well, you should read it. Anyway, nobody reads it. So I don't ask of my kids that they're obliged to read the books. I'm sure they haven't, or it's too many.
This one also is a packed question. Would you ever consider writing a prequel book about Eric's background? I ask this question because I and many of the people who have read and enjoyed the series, who I meet while working at the library, have always wondered where Aerith did come from. What was his life like before he met Poppy? How did he get to be in the log that we see in the first book? A book about Aerith's early life background could address all these questions and make for a very good book. I know a lot of people, including myself, would be interested in reading this potential book, so I hope you'll consider it. What do you think?
Huh. I'll consider it. I don't know.
It's like,
actually,
a lot.
I once thought about it, and I just never pursued it. To do that when you write a series like that, the question is, will the publisher be interested? It's difficult for me to think of those books without the illustrator, the wonderful Brian Floca. It's a lot of work for him. Would I publish another Poppy book without him?
Mm.
I would not like to. Who's to say that he would he's a busy guy on his own terms. He may not want to for his own perfectly reasonable reasons. I'd hate to badger him to do something like that. Um, I might get off this chat and say, Brian, we go back and forth. He's a good friend now. Someone suggested I do a book of Earth. If I suggested writing a book of Earth, would you be interested in doing it? I'm sorry, Avi, I'm just too busy. I got too many other things to do. When we did the last book, we sort of understood that that was the last one. I mean, there are 7 in the series, but maybe I should write and ask him. Maybe
So I'm sorry, so there's 7 books in the Dimwood series?
in the Poppy
Wow.
series. 7.
The Poppy series. Okay, that's a lot. And how did
Yeah.
that's actually a follow question to that. What was the first story that you guys collaborated on?
It was a very early, perhaps first graphic novel for kids. It's called City of Light, City of Dark. And I was living in Providence, Rhode Island. And I sort of knew David Macaulay, the great illustrator. And Macaulay was teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design.
Oh.
And when I was living in Providence, and he was an acquaintance, I wouldn't call him a friend, a nice acquaintance. And when I had this idea of doing a graphic novel, I asked David if he had anybody he taught illustration, if he knew anybody who would potentially be interested in doing a graphic novel. And he said he had a 18-year-old student named Brian Floca. And Brian Floca was a student not only at Rhode Island School of Design, but simultaneously at Brown University. They had some sort of an agreement where a student can be both enrolled in both schools simultaneously. And Brian Floca was doing a comic strip for the Brown University student newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So we were introduced, and I asked him, I liked his work, and would he be interested, and so forth and so on. And then I had to convince my editor, who had never considered doing anything like a graphic novel. And he said, I don't even know what it is. So I sent him a copy of Art Spiegelman's Mouse. Perhaps you know that one. Quite a powerful graphic novel. And my editor, that was Richard Jackson at the time, got intrigued, and we worked it all out. And Brian did that first book, Poppy, so forth. So there it was.
That's cool. This question was a little bit further on, but again, it mentions about the Dimwood Forest series. In one of the blog posts, you mentioned that it has a lot of autobiographical content, such as becoming a stepfather and domestic skirmishes. And can you elaborate on that?
When you're a writer, when I'm a writer, bits and pieces of your life you exploit, you use based on your own memory. I mean, there is, in the second book I wrote, which is called Hoppy and Ragweed, I think. Ragweed becomes, as it were, Poppy's spouse. Mm-hmm. And there's a moment where they meet in the middle of a forest, and it's sort of love at first sight. And that is, I won't describe meeting my wife as meeting another mouse in a forest, but it was meeting her in a bookstore. And it was a little bit of love at first sight, mutual. And so, that kind of thing creeps into a book, and it's obviously dramatic. So there's that. And then the story of Aerith's birthday we've talked about. bits and pieces always. I was recently writing a book in which somebody is immigrating to the United States from Sicily and
Mhm.
has to pass through Ellis Island.
Yeah.
And then when you left Ellis Island, you took a ferry to Manhattan. Now, as a kid, my parents used to go to a place that required a ferry. And I remember that a ferry ride for a 10-year-old kid was very exciting. And I have very clear and pleasant memories of what it's like to ride in a ferry, which then bumps into a dock and so forth. And here I was using those memories some 60, 70 years later in a book. And yeah, those things happen all the time to writers. Little bits and pieces, everything from sights to smells to
Mhm.
small experiences happens all the
It's
time.
like that writer's, I guess that's like I don't want to call it like a writer's motto, but maybe like one of the rules of writing is to write what you know. But I've never really considered, that's interesting that you brought that up, that I never really considered to write what you know as being part of memory. Because somehow those two for some reason just didn't really connect, but I never thought of them as memory. That's an interesting concept.
People don't talk about that as an aspect of writing, but memory is one of the key components of a writer's skills or lack of skills, as it
Mm.
were. And it's not always old memories. I'm writing another animal book now, and it deals with a very old creature. And sometimes at my age, I feel old. So it's very easy to talk about what it's like to be old in this context. But that's not memory, that's day to day.
Yeah.
But a book like Was That Masked Man Anyway, which is about the old radio dramas that I used to
Yes.
listen to as a kid.
Hmm.
I mean, that was predicated on my memory of spending endless hours listening to the radio, which I adored. And at one point in writing the book, because of the plot, I had to make up a brief radio drama, such as that would motivate the kids in the story to do certain things. And I wrote this, and as I wrote it, I said, "Oh, I've missed my calling. I really should have been a radio writer for kids." And it just flowed right out of me. I knew exactly what to do. And, so here it is. I mean, that book is full of memories about what it was like to listen to the radio as a kid, what it was like to live through World War II and so forth. So yeah, that book is infused with memory.
Mhm. I cannot think of the name of that story of yours that I read, but when I think I read like five or maybe seven of your books before the first interview, but I remembered something that you were writing a story about the young boy whose teacher uh is expecting, and if they found out, then she would have been fired. I can't think of the name of that of the title.
Um, yeah, I know which one. That's
And
Don't You Know There's a War On?
yes, that's the one. Yeah, yeah, that one I really really loved.
Uh,
Um,
Now that's a good example. I mean, my favorite part of that book, the boy has a crush on his teacher. He loves her,
mhm,
and he's been fired, and he doesn't know why. And it turns out this takes place in the 1940s. She's been fired because she's become pregnant.
mhm,
And in those days, a teacher who became pregnant was not allowed to teach. And so, in the context of the story, he visits her
mhm,
in her tiny apartment and she tells him what her story is. And I love reading that section. It always moves me, and it's 100% imaginary. There's nothing it's based on in terms of my own life,
mhm.
but somehow it comes out of something that's very real. and it works wonderfully. I love
Yes.
reading it out loud.
That was one of my favorites. Um, some more on the message and themes. What message or theme were you trying to convey in your short story? I can read this. In your short story, what do fish have to do with anything?
Well, I'm trying to remember it. I don't sit down thinking I have a message. I never do that. I try to think of a story that reveals something about something.
Mhm.
And in that one, it's about a boy and his mother. The father is not there. And he develops a friendship with a homeless man on the street who seems to be begging on a regular basis on the street where the kid lives. And they develop a real friendship. And the mother in the story is horrified by this and tries to prevent this friendship from taking place.
Hmm.
And the title refers to how people who fish who live in caves don't develop eyesight. And the implication in the story is he's saying to his mother, you live in a cave, you don't see the world. And
Oh,
that's what the title means. And he says towards the end of the book something about you live in a cave like fish, and she says, what do fish have to do with anything? But it's the reader would associate it, knows exactly what he's talking about.
hmm. I never thought about it that way. As a younger writer, how did you deal with rejection of your work? How did you deal with it? And how do you deal with it now? And does it ever get easier?
I sulk. It's no fun ever to be told that what you're doing is not very good, but you have to listen. I try never to argue with anyone who says your work is not as good as it should be or doesn't work at all. You have to listen. If four people say the same thing about a book of yours, they're probably there's probably some truth to it.
Mhm.
Uh, so it, all I can say is that it can often be very painful, but you have to learn from that criticism because it's the only way you can get it better or make the work better. Um, the first person who hears my books is my wife. Usually I read them. She's a very good critic, but she's also very tough. And there have been times when she says things that I wish she hadn't said, not because she's wrong, but because she's probably right. And that means I just have to go back into the book and work on it again. So, what I would say in answer to that question, you have to learn from that stuff. No writer in the world is going to be appreciated by everyone. No
Right.
one, no one. And there's always somebody who can find some fault with your work. And it's not to say they're wrong. So you just have to learn from it. That's the only answer I can give.
Usually when it comes to I don't want to say rejection, but this is sort of like a I guess like an afterthought. Um Usually how many what was I'm not sure I don't recall what the first book of yours was, but when it came to selling your first manuscript, how many publishers did you end up sending it to at the
I think
time?
it was turned down by 6 or 7 at first before it was accepted. I think that's the case. There was a book called Things That Sometimes Happen.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, I think that's the case, 6 or 7.
Because usually I'm not sure if they were even around at that time, but there's like the literary what is it called? The I have it I have it here, the writer's market. So did you have to actually just go out and send it before without having knowledge of what the publishing company did?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. When I uh, began as a professional writer, I was writing plays. I wanted to be a Broadway playwright.
Mm.
And when I came out of college, university, I had written a play um, that through personal contacts, I had a friend whose father was professionally involved in the theater. And naturally, I got him to read this play, and he thought it had some value, and he sent it to an agent, a theater agent, and it turned out that this agent was considered the best agent in New York City at the time. Not that I knew that. And she was interested in it. And as it were, signed me up as one of her clients.
Mm.
And now let me hasten to say that the play was never produced, but right from the beginning of my writing career, once I left university, I always had an agent.
Mm.
And that is unusual. And then when I stopped writing plays, I knew what having an agent meant and could be. And even when I stopped writing plays, I went out and found myself a literary agent.
Mm.
So that first book that I wrote, you asked, how did it get circulated? It was circulated by an agent. So right from the beginning, I had professional colleagues with whom I worked. So that's a little different than for most authors.
Okay. And that I think one of the key things as well for the majority of authors. Later on, there's a question about self-publishing, but do you believe that one of the key things to being a very successful author is to have an agent specifically for whatever um, writer's market that you want to get into?
Well, there are good agents and there are not such good agents. And if you have a really good agent who really believes in what you do, it makes an enormous difference. If you have an agent who is not as effective, it can hamper your career. So
Mhm.
that becomes part of the equation as well. Uh, so that over the years, I've had maybe 4 agents. One of them, first one, um, she went into another field. The second one just didn't work out. The third one, I worked for many years, and then she just retired, and I had to find somebody. And some editors I had said, "Oh, why don't you work with this person?" And that worked out, and I'm still with that agent. So that's the way that works.
You have mentioned on your blog that you have a manuscript called Fear. When do you think that will be published, as it sounds interesting?
Oh, that has such a curious history. You want to hear the whole thing?
Why not?
I wrote this book, I don't know, 20 years ago, Fear. And I sent it to one of those agents I just mentioned. This was not the one I have. And she said, "Well, this is one serious, strange book. I don't know what to tell you about it. Let me send it to your editor." The editor read it and said, "If we publish this book, it'll ruin your career." So, okay, put it aside. That didn't sound like a good recommendation.
Hmm.
Okay, 10 years go by. The editor calls me up out of the blue. I've been thinking about that book. Maybe we should publish it. Okay, well, let me look at it. But I wrote it on a computer. It was on one of those tiny diskettes, which I was no longer part of computer technology.
Mm.
So I didn't know where it was. And then I remembered we were talking about moving before. I had shoved all of those old diskettes in a box,
Yeah.
and they were probably in the basement somewhere. And after some searching, I found the box and I found the disc that contained that manuscript. But then what was I to do with it? I can't use it on my current computer. So I had to hire a technology computer expert to convert it into usable on my current computer. So then I salvaged the book. I started to work on it. And then that editor died.
Oh, my goodness.
So, okay. So here I had this book. And every once in a while I'd turn back to it and work on it. And then I completely rewrote it and sent it to a couple of people. And they just said it's no good. It's awful. It's a terrible book.
Hmm.
It's unpleasant. It's scary. It doesn't work. Anyway, I kept doing this, that, and the other thing. Okay, now I finally was convinced it's no good, so I put it away. About a month ago, an editor called me and said, we want to reissue a collection of your short stories, but would like to add a new one. You think you could write another short story? And I thought, and I said, yeah. So I took that novel, Fear, and rewrote it as a short story. I sent it to the editor, and she said, "Oh, great, this is good. We'll use that." So that book that person was interested in will come out next year, I think, as part of a collection of short stories that is being reissued. So there you go.
That's
And
that's cool.
I won't even tell you the title. It's too creepy. Anyway, so it has a long history, but it will
Yeah.
be published. So
Yeah. I'm not sure. I've the most I can't even think of the word. The last book of yours I read, I'm not sure if it was part of a duology, but it was about Oliver Cromwell something.
yeah,
Pi-
yeah, it's called The Unexpected Life of Oliver Cromwell, somebody.
Yeah,
Pitts.
that's the one. That one was just, I was literally hanging on. It was sort of like one of the what did Stephen King call it? It was sort of like almost Dickensian. You were hanging on to the end of each episode.
That was the intent.
Oh,
And then I wrote a sequel, so there was two books in that.
okay. Yeah.
And I may write a third. So we'll see.
You mentioned in one of your blog posts again that the book The Wind in the Willows can be read as a rejection of the modern world. What did you mean by that? And you also mentioned that the book promotes, I'm not even sure if this is spelled correctly, promotes pantheism. And what did you mean
Pantheism.
by that? Pantheism. Okay.
Pantheism, basically, it's a kind of belief system in which it's a worship of nature.
Mhm.
Pan is
Oh,
I
that's
think
true.
is a Greek god. He's the Greek god of nature. half man, half goat, and he appears in The Wind in the Willows. Pan does. And the animals, there's one chapter in which uh, Ratty and Mole are helping their friend Otter search for his lost child. And when they find him at the feet of the god Pan. Anyway, it's a sort of mystical chapter. And I gather that at the time the book was written by Kenneth Grahame, pantheism had some vogue in England or something like that. Anyway, but the book is, it's a wonderful book. I love it, Wind in the Willows. But it's, it's a rejection of modernism. It's of life in a rural setting, companionship, male companionship. Women don't come off very well in the book. It's very much an English clubby book.
Okay.
And, they make fun of Toad and his fascination with modern things, particularly
yeah.
cars.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Toad is a wonderful character. What makes the book, aside from its wonderful writing, is these wonderful characters: Mole, Toad, Ratty, Badger. They're extraordinarily wonderful, real creatures. And it's also, in some ways, a wonderfully funny book, particularly The Adventures of Toad.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's I think that's why a lot of, like, I'm not sure how many kids or young teens have even read it today, but the Toad seems to be like the Elvis of the story. He's that popular because of all the
well,
his fanaticism about modernism and all that.
well, what's wonderful about the book is Toad is a narcissist.
Mm,
He's utterly vain. He's selfish. He's not very nice, but he's utterly lovable. And it's this, this is, you're talking about the skill of a writer. If you met Toad in person, so to speak, he's utterly obnoxious. He's awful. He's a snob. There's nothing to be said nice about him except he's wonderful. And and it's a remarkable achievement from a point of view of a writer, that he can write this sort of awful creature who you absolutely adore.
yeah.
He's so much fun. He's so much fun.
I'll have to go back to read The Wind in the Willows, because I remember seeing that they used to have these cartoon shorts, and The Wind in
Right.
the Willows was my first introduction to the story. And then I remember reading the story, but I guess I wasn't as, like, emotionally connected or something. I don't remember that chapter about Otter's son and the one where he's at the feet of the god of Pan. I'll have to go back to that. Huh.
It's very mystical. The book is odd that there are different chapters that seem totally disconnected from the book as a whole, and then there are others that really come together in wonderful ways. There's one chapter in which Mole rediscovers his own old house, and it's Christmas, and it's a wonderful Christmas story. Wonderful. And so forth. It's just an extraordinary book.
I will need to definitely go back and reread it, because I was, yeah, there were, I mean, for me, the Christmas story that I absolutely love is, of course, Dickens's The Christmas Carol. There's nothing,
Correct.
there's just,
Right.
it's so different, because you don't expect to see the three ghosts or the spirits come back and guide this Scrooge.
Right.
that kind of and the way that you were describing Aerith, I'm not sure if that has any kind of connection to what he.
Scrooge, maybe. Maybe.
But speaking of the publishers, so how do your publishers determine what is the most commercially viable book cover and title?
I wish I knew. I've had some wonderful covers. I've had some terrible covers. And I don't, publishing is a somewhat mysterious business
Mhm.
in the sense that publishers themselves try to keep it very secret. On one hand, they are absolutely key to the creation and distribution of literature. On the other hand, they can be indifferent to the writer. They can be very cruel to the writer.
Mhm.
And they can be very opaque with the writer. How they make their decisions, they don't share those decisions with you, or they do in a very peripheral way. I've been turned down for books for reasons that are never explained. They just say, we're going to pass on this. And the other hand, had books accepted. And when they accept it, they always say they love them. Love is a big word in publishing. There's not a lot of gradations from love. They love the work and so forth, but it's very complicated, the relationship between the writer and the publisher. It's not as open as it seems. Their publishing is a business. A lot of decisions are made from a business perspective, which are not necessarily shared with the writer.
Mhm.
So it can be very, very difficult. It can be wonderful at the same time. You think you're working with your best friends one day, and the next day they're not. You don't know why, and you don't know why.
So, and I'm not sure if this question follows that, but whether it's based on the book cover or the story, do you feel that books or novels have gotten worse or better over the years?
I can't. You should talk to my wife about that. She's a much better reader than I am. And she reads much more widely than I do. I don't know. I mean, I don't follow contemporary literature on purpose. There's so many books out there that are wonderful that I've never read, that I'll never run out of things to read. And one of the extraordinary things about books, I can pick up a Jane Austen novel and enjoy it as if it was written today,
Yeah.
even though it was written 200 years ago. Uh, Books, it's a corny phrase, but when they're good, they're timeless. Somebody
Yes.
described good literature as news that is always new. And in the sense that if they're about the human condition, human life, that hasn't changed. People are people in all their complexity and fascination. So I don't worry about running out of books to read.
Would you ever consider writing a sequel to your book, The Good Dog? It would be neat to revisit the characters
Huh.
of Jack and McKinley again.
Well, he's one of my stepsons. He's now 35 years old. And has a different dog. He has a huge dog named Hoagie, who would make an interesting character. In theory, I could think about it, but I don't think I will. So,
Okay. When you write a book, can you sense how popular will it be, or is it a crapshoot?
hard question. I think I know when a book is good. And I think I also know when a book is not as good as the good ones. I think I can tell if it's a good book, if it flows out of me,
Mm,
if it's not that to say it's not hard to write, but that I know exactly what I'm doing and where it's going. When that happens, it tends to be a better book. But if I'm struggling with a book and saying, what in the world is going on here? How can I possibly finish this thing? It probably is not as good a book as the others. So in a sense, I do, but I've been wrong about that both ways,
mhm.
thinking the book is really good and it doesn't become, if you will, popular. And then books that I didn't think would be that way that have become popular. So I'm not always the best judge.
Because you stated on like good literature is timeless, why do you think some books endure for generations and others fade away?
Wish I knew the answer to that. I think great literature does two things, perhaps. It catches the essence of some fundamental human dilemma and does so in a way that it is continually revealing humanity in one way or another. It as I just quoted that, I don't know who said this about good literature. It is news that is always new. In other
Mm,
words, it says something fundamental about humanity and does it in such a way that it's forever enlightening and wonderful to read and captures extraordinarily the ideas and the emotions of the characters involved.
mm. Would that be
And
something like, and that's, do you think that's why, what is it? Do you think that's why The Wind in the Willows is you consider a timeless?
well, it works that way for me.
Mhm,
You said you read it, it didn't quite catch your imagination
mhm.
because we're different.
Right.
And a book that I've always loved, I mean, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, uh, is a book that has meaning for me. A book like Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon uh, has meaning for me, but it doesn't mean that it would have meaning for you.
True.
And, and vice versa. You will have books that are favorites that I may never have heard of. And even if I knew them and read them, they didn't necessarily connect with me. And one of the things that's so wonderful about literature is that it speaks to different people in different ways at different times. I mean, you can look at any number of books uh, that were enormously important to people at different times. I was just thinking recently of uh, Bunyan's 17th century. It's really, in some ways, the first novel, Pilgrim's Progress.
Yes.
Now, that is considered the first bestseller, if that's the word. This is a time of growing literacy in the Western world. Um, and I was reading somewhere that he was the first writer to incorporate dialogue in narrative. And I never thought of that before. And I'm not even sure if it's true. It's something I read. But it had enormous meaning for huge numbers of people. In some ways, it was considered biblical in its impact on people, but it's totally not read today. I mean, I know you don't hear someone saying, "Oh, I just read Pilgrim's Progress," and you ought to read it. It's really, you don't hear that. But in its day, it was this enormously influential book, and it had a profound influence on the emergence of British literature and English literature in general, and the structure of books. I mean, it's hugely important. but that was then.
Right.
It's not now. That doesn't diminish the book. It just doesn't speak in the same way.
There's several that are definitely timeless, that are like they have really special meaning, because number one, because I love, like what you talk about the stories that have to do with the human condition, and even if it was from a time when I wasn't even around,
Correct.
um it definitely, like what you said, the stories are news that are new or something. I got
Correct.
right. And it's like, and we still see these obstacles. Like, for instance, I read Fahrenheit 451 in high school. It had no meaning for me back then. And
Which
then
was the
I
book?
read, I'm
Which
sorry,
book?
uh,
What
um,
book?
I'm sorry, Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah,
I,
Bradbury.
yeah. And it didn't really have meaning for me back then in high school. And then the next timeless book that came up was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. That had
Yeah,
me by the tenterhooks. I loved it. And
yes,
then when
wonderful book.
Mhm. And then because it had to do with a child's, uh, just the depths of the the trials that she has to go through just to be an educated young woman. And you
Yes,
still see people, young children today are struggling to get through these obstacles. So that's why for me it's like, that's, I mean, but the reason I think why it's it's part of American literature, but a lot of students are turned off by it, I guess, because of the length, because
right.
it's a pretty big
Yes,
book.
it is.
And then when I started teaching Fahrenheit 451, it's weird how I would read it for my kids, and the more I read it, the more I'm like, this is so me. This is now the book has greater meaning, especially now
Sure.
because of the book bans. You still
Right,
have countries worldwide who actually will unfortunately, burn certain text, or
right,
quarantine them now, is the new term. So yeah, I,
right,
I get that. Yeah.
right.
And then of course my favorite of yours is A Beginning, a Muddle, and an End,
Huh.
which is it's genius, on the play on words, on just a snail and ant, and they're trying to help each other out by trying to figure out what's the story that we're going to write about, and all their
Right.
little adventures. I just found that one is timeless to me, because that's like every time I read it, it gives me the, I guess, the, what is that, the drive to write.
Huh. Okay.
So speaking of Colorado, how has living in rural Colorado impacted your books or your writing?
Oh, in the sense that I don't think I'm very good at inventing places. I I like to, when I choose a place that the story is set, I like to know it. So I will therefore visit it. When I wrote this second volume of Crispin, which takes place in France, I went to France, and my wife and I went there, and we went to the place where the story happens, and it had a huge impact on the book itself. So living in Colorado, I mean, I'm a New York City kid. So living in Colorado, I live here in the middle of a forest. If I look out from where I am sitting here, I'm looking out into a whole range of mountains and forests. I can look down the valley some 70 miles. So books like The Good Dog, which take place in Steamboat Springs, which is the largest town near where I live. Even a book like Perlu the Bold, which I wrote in part for my son who loved skiing. Um, then there's books like The Secret School. It was here
Yes.
in Colorado that I was introduced to one-room schoolhouses.
Mm,
Uh, and then that's a sequel, which was recently published, called The Secret Sisters. And then there's Hard Gold, which is about prospecting in Colorado. Uh, Old Wolf takes place in the woods, and it's about a wolf. These are Colorado stories, and they wouldn't have been written unless I lived here. absolutely not. And then there's a new book which you alluded to, which takes place in a small mining town here in Colorado.
What was the reason why you moved from the East Coast to Colorado? What drew you to this place?
My wife, I met her here. I was doing a book signing and she was managing a bookstore. So what could be better?
Definitely.
She wasn't gonna move and I would. So that's why I went to Colorado.
It's cool. And then, speaking of the books today versus what's happening now with AI, how do you think AI will impact the book publishing industry? And what do you think AI generated books will be like if that happens?
It will happen.
Mm.
I call your attention to in today's New York Times on the op-ed page, there's a long piece by a woman who's an editor, a writer, and a teacher at Yale. And she's writing about the impact of AI on students and the world of writing in general. It's a quite wonderful article, and I couldn't agree more with everything she says. And my answer would be a repetition of that article. I would recommend it. It's wonderfully well written and very, very smart. I think that AI is not good for writing because it takes the humanity out of writing.
Thank you.
And as my wife likes to point out, the responses that AI give are all from things already written. It's always about what's there already. It's not about what someone is creating in the future. Just as, think about it, a photograph is always about the past. It's about something that was visualized in the past because it's a photograph.
Mhm.
And AI in some ways is always about the past. It's not necessarily the present, and it's certainly not a future vision. So, but I think publishers will pick up on it, writers will pick up on it, books will be written with it, buy it, and publishers will publish books created by AI. I have no doubt whatsoever.
I definitely agree with you that it takes the humanity, but it also, I think what it also does, it eliminates the originality of new
Correct.
writers who want to have something to say. And it's like all they need to do is type in what chat GPT or whatever
Right.
this other stuff is, and it's already done for them, which is very it's
Correct.
it's crazy.
Correct.
For Kenneth Grahame, going back to The Wind and the Willows, it says here, you mentioned that you had read a biography of him, and learning more about him made it difficult to understand what was his connection to this extraordinary book that he wrote. What do you think was his connection to it, and how did he, Grahame, supposedly a difficult person, produce such a classic book?
Well, in some ways, his wife created some of the characters of the book. Uh, I don't, he was a very troubled man. He had a very troubled marriage. His son committed suicide.
Oh,
Uh, when you read his biography, you don't know. It's a puzzle how he had created this book. The only clue that I gained out of it is that he was such a personally isolated person that he developed a kind of fantasy. He had a very unhappy childhood, and he seems to have created a kind of alternate universe for himself, both as a child and as an adult. And I think that the books, uh, Wind in the Willows, uh, is a reflection of that alternate universe. On the other hand, you read one of his short stories called The Reluctant Dragon. I don't know if you ever read it. but it's an absolutely
Reluctant.
superb short story about a boy's friendship with a dragon that is beyond charming. It's just quite wonderful. And I don't know where it comes from. Who knows? But if I were to sit down and read and pick a book to a 6 or 7 year old, and I wanted to read a short story, I would reach for The Reluctant Dragon. It's absolutely wonderful. And I don't know where that comes from. Who knows? But
The the title though, wasn't that
the
made
relu-
into a cartoon? The Reluctant
yeah,
Dragon?
a terrible one. But read the book. It's the short story. It'll take you 40 minutes to read,
Okay.
and
I
it
had no
just
idea. Wow.
it just will glow. It just wonderful. It's about this boy who meets a dragon who doesn't want to fight or breathe fire. He just wants to write poetry. And and I don't know, it's quite wonderful.
I've never, that's the first, but it's interesting how when you're describing Grahame and Back to the Wind and the Willows about the rejection of modernism, it reminds me very much, and I'm not sure if you've heard of this, it's called the Romantic Paradigm.
No.
It's sort of like the simplest way to explain it is like nature is good, culture is bad. It's sort of like when someone is
I get it.
grown up in like a civilized world, whereas there's rules put into place by everyone else,
Correct.
but nature is free. So
Correct. All
wondering,
right.
yeah. And so we did talk about your relation, your somewhat collaboration with editors and publishers, but how have they been like over the years? And have you ever worked with one that you did not like? And if so, how did you handle
I wouldn't mention that now.
it?
Um, working with an editor is collaborative writing at its best. Um, you alluded to self-publishing. I have no problems at all with self-publishing. The problem comes in not having an editor, being your own editor. You need somebody on the outside to critique your work and make suggestions. So I've had wonderful editors, and I've had editors that drive me crazy. I try not to work with the ones who drive me crazy. And, I worked with one of the best editors around, Richard Jackson. Um, he was a brilliant editor, but at the same time, he was a very complicated man. And I don't even think that I, in retrospect, knew him that very well. I don't know if anybody knew him that very well. He worked with many different authors, and many different authors adored him, as I did. He was different things to different people. That was one of his great skills, but also one of his great mysteries. But he was a wonderful editor. And working with a good editor is a wonderful experience because it makes you work so much better.
I've never heard of this one. This question has to do with reading rockets. I've heard of reading Rainbow, but I never heard of this one. It says here, many years ago in an interview with Reading Rockets, you talked about how you were in a planetarium once and the lights went down and the stars came up, and the narrator of the lecture said, there comes a time when everybody begins to understand that the Earth is not the center of the universe. You then went on to say, the notion that the world is a tiny speck in the universe is very different from thinking I, meaning humanity, the earth, am the center of the universe. I wanted to ask, what does that mean to you? How do you think that that has impacted the way we, humanity, think about life nowadays in the modern era versus earlier times? This is a huge path question, but
I'll say, of course, it's called Philosophy 101. You know, they recently, because astronomy has progressed the way it has, there's these images, digital images that have been created of the universe. And it's clear if you look at them, the universe is beyond immense. It's beyond comprehension.
Mhm.
And when you think of the planet Earth as being no more than a grain of sand in this vast existence, I look out my window even as I'm sitting here and I see these forests and the mountains, and it's colossal to me. And it's vastly bigger than me. And yet the earth as such is quite insignificant. And yet it's significant to us, right? And trying to balance those two concepts together is difficult. I remember when I was in college, I took a course in, I don't know why, some requirement about geology. And I remember that the instructor, the professor, talking about the universe. And when I tried to conjure up the universe, it would give me a headache. I couldn't grasp it. I still can't. And yet we have this insularity on the world, and yet we treat it so badly, and we don't take care of it. In fact, we're probably ruining it.
Yeah.
It's full of contradictions, and I don't presume to understand how we are to deal with all this, but it's very real. And here's all this climate change, which is bringing these enormous changes to our life and making life much more difficult. And there are people who are quite willing to deny it and pretend that it's not happening. It's somewhat bewildering that we have this capacity to create vast scientific knowledge and insights into the universe. And yet sometimes on Earth, we fumble and are stupid. It's a real contradiction.
Yeah.
I don't presume to have answers for that.
So in that same interview with Reading Rockets, you say that I don't know if it says read or read history as a matter of course, and that there's a quote, what does it say? A philosophical notion in it, I think, that lies somewhere in the midst of all this. And that is, if you have a vision that the world was different than it is today, that embraces the notion of change. And if you accept the idea of change, then there's going to be change in the future, and you then become part of the process of change in one way or another, or you're aware of the process of change. I was wondering if you could collaborate on that, and what did you mean?
Goodness, who knew that I thought so deeply about things? Well, I do believe that if you read history, it's about human change. Things happen. And if you realize that, then you say, you asked this question before. I mean, are things changing now? Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Of course. Will it change for the better? Hopefully, yes, but it doesn't have to. And but I believe in change because I know it has happened in the past and I want it to happen in the future. I mean, I have a lot of grandchildren. I'd like them to lead interesting, happy lives. Do I think they will? Not automatically, no. I'm not so sure.
You had mentioned that your father was skeptical of your decision to write books. And what impact do you think that had on your writing and overall career? And does that still have an impact on you today?
My father was an awful man.
Mm,
He was,
yeah.
he's the complete narcissist. He used to make fun of my writing.
Mm,
He discouraged it and thought I couldn't do it. Um, I'm also a somewhat stubborn person and in a sort of converse sort of way. I think in pushing back against him and his attitude towards me in writing probably helped me become a writer because I wanted to prove him wrong.
Mm.
Sometimes you learn through negatives, not positives.
Basically sort of like when it comes to publishers or editors criticism,
Yeah,
like
well,
they're
I don't necessarily take criticism very well, but you have to learn to do it.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not sure if you've already discussed this. What book of yours makes you the most emotional when you read it?
Of my own,
Hmm.
I have a personal theory that when I finish a book, if I don't feel emotional about it, then it's probably not very good. So uh, some have more, some have less. I don't know how to answer that really.
That's fine. What advice would you give to someone who is a first-time writer who has a manuscript but keeps getting turned down and cannot get published?
When I was a college student, I had a mentor who used to show my work to. And once I came home from college and I had this stack of stuff that I wrote, and I brought it to him. I mean, this is something you do when you're 18 or 19. Lee, would you read this and tell me what you think? And well, he looked at it and he said, well, come back next week. And I came back. He was from Arkansas and he had this absolutely wonderful Arkansas drawl, Southern drawl. I won't insult him by trying to imitate him, but it was quite wonderful. And so I said to him, well, Lee, what do you think? And he said, well, Avi, it takes a heap of manure to grow a flower. And I've never forgot that.
It takes a heap
And
of manure to go, oh my God.
I mean, of course, he's right, right?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I mean, I've never forgotten that. And I mean, it's a funny phrase, and I just took it in. I wasn't insulted by it, but
Yeah.
here I am remembering it 70 years later.
Yeah.
And of course, he's right. It's still true. It's still true.
Yeah. And I think we discussed on the first book of yours was the things that
Things that
happen,
sometimes,
the things that
things that
sometimes happen.
sometimes happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So your experience on getting your first book published, I know that you started off as a playwright and you had it circulated by an agent. You said the first one was rejected by 6 or 7. So that I want
Yeah.
to say maybe that was difficult for you, but was it easier to get books published now than it was then starting?
I think it's very hard to get a book published today.
Mm.
I think, in fact, it's harder today. There was, this was in the 60s, early 70s. Um, there was a great deal of money given to libraries and schools. There was a lot of promotion of reading. I think that's all vanished. I mean, here we've just had the Department of Education taken away. We've taken money away from schools, book bannings, and so forth and so on. I think it's much more difficult. There are much fewer publishers. When I started publishing, there must have been about 30 publishers worthy of the name. Now there are about 10 or 12. It's quite different, quite different, quite different.
Mm.
It was
What do you
much easier in the old days.
Yeah. What do you think, speaking of now, what do you think of the concept of self-publishing?
I have no problems with it. I think you have to have an editor, an objective editor that you work with. But if if you have the money and you have the time, uh, lots of people are doing it. Some people are successful, very few are.
It says here you once wrote a short story called Bored Tom. I was wondering what was the inspiration behind that and what was the moral, if there was.
moral. It's about a boy who's bored with school and he meets a cat
Mm.
who's able to change places with him. So the boy becomes a cat and the cat becomes a boy. And then the boy wants to go back to becoming a boy and it becomes very difficult.
Mm. The same question also applies to another short story called The Goodness of, I hope I say it right, The Goodness of Matt Kaiser. Again, the inspiration, the moral, and is the story a journey of self-discovery in the end?
I once knew a woman who she was a teacher actually, and she was married to a minister in the Episcopalian Church,
Mhm.
and she had children of her own, and she was once telling me the difficulties that her children had by virtue of being the son of a minister,
Mhm.
that uh, how people, classmates and whatnot, uh, sort of taunted this kid that he had to be good because he was a minister's son. And that was the genesis of that story.
Huh.
It's about a kid who uh, is always taking dares, and he's usually dared to do something mischievous or get into trouble. And then at one point, he's dared to do something good. And that's the hardest thing of all for him to be. That's the story. So
Huh. That's cool. What is, and the last question that Jay had compiled is, what is more important in writing in books, the journey or the destination?
you mean in the writing of it or the
Yeah,
story?
more, yeah, in writing and in books, I guess in general.
Writing a good story that people want to read. That's all there is. That's all there ever will be. That's it. If you can get them to turn the pages, you've done a good job.
Okay. Did you want to maybe save the questions for your book coming out for a different time?
Yeah, I'll be interested in your reaction to it when you read it.
Yeah, I could. The only thing that I wanted to ask you was, and I've heard of this, the divine, I hope I say it right, the divining rod.
Yeah,
So the only question I have for you on that one at the moment, when I asked you the first time, I think at that point you were writing a book about Colorado. How
could
much,
be.
like, how much time did you spend on the research behind the story that I literally just started? But then the second was, what was the inspiration behind why choosing the divining rod as like a very unique tool in driving the story forward?
Well, when you live in a rural area, it's not unusual to meet people who have beliefs that you think are antiquated. A couple of summers ago, we had problems with our well water, and the pipe, which was fairly lengthy from the well to our house, had sprung a leak somewhere.
Mhm.
And we engaged uh, a construction company to repair it, find the leak, and so forth. And early on in the project, the guy who was in charge of it, a friend of mine, was walking along and he had a rod in his hand. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "It's a divining rod. I'm trying to find out where the leak is."
Mm.
I said, "You're not serious, are you?" I mean, this is a guy who ran a fairly large company in which
Yeah.
he did very well in his work and so forth. Big machines, any number of people working. And here he had this bent piece of wire, which he was trying to locate the leak with a divining rod.
Mm.
He said, "It works." And it moved. He said it moved. I said, "Let me handle that." It didn't work for me. It worked for him.
Mm.
Anyway, so And there was somebody else who was working, digging a well up here, a neighbor, and they brought in somebody with a divining rod. So, I mean, people believe in these things. And who am I to say they don't work? I don't know.
Yeah,
There you go.
that's interesting because years ago I was reading about I was hoping to talk with him. It was a and I really hope I get his name right, Charles DeLynn or Charles DeLynn, and he's I believe he's a Canadian writer, and he compiled a bunch of his the Triskel chaps, and
Mhm.
he and I think some had done some research about the fairy bush and how people in Ireland take it so seriously that they dare not disturb a fairy bush because of bad
Right,
fortune, bad future fortune that could befall them.
right.
So let's say they're building a house, they'll decide to, it's on a particular spot, but they don't want to disturb the bush. So they will make a design, they will make an architecture of the house,
I
either
believe
going
it.
around it. Yeah. That's interesting how a director, the head of the company, would still use the I guess I don't even want to call it a myth, but that they would use that special.
I mean, this guy owns any number of gigantic machines
Mhm.
that must cost a fortune to own. And here he is working with his bent piece of wire, trying to locate a leak in the woods. I mean, it's just that's people.
Yeah. Do you think that's also, and this is my own question, do you think that like when it comes to writers, that writers will, even though they become this like for yourself, that they become successful in their work, but there's some kind of divine religious possibly um aspect behind their creation that they dare not let go of for fear of bad fortune ahead? Do you have something like that you
My
work
wife,
with?
my wife has described me as the least spiritual person she's ever met.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
possibly. Yeah. Well, I will definitely need to read
Okay.
the story itself. But thank you so much, and thank you, Jay Lang, for compiling all of these questions from your devoted readership in Canada. And I found out what it is. So it's the Grace. It's known as the Harbor Grace Library in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada.
Wow.
So if you want to give a shout out to your readership, now's the time.
I'd love to visit Newfoundland. I've been there. Halifax, Newfoundland, isn't that right? I've been there.
It just says Newfoundland and Labrador.
I've not been to Labrador. I've been to Prince Edward Island, and
Okay.
I've been to, anyway, I've
Yeah.
been up near there. I'd like to visit. Sounds wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again, Avi, so much. Looking forward to this this wonderful book. Maybe we'll see. I'm hoping to see Fear in that short story collection. And once again, thank you, Jay Lang, and on a
Okay.
really devoted readership. And thank you so much. And say hi to your family. Say thank you to your wife
Okay.
as well.
Hooray for Canada.
Yeah. All
More
right.
power to you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Take care.